Natalie, you're not really family. My mother said it calmly, like she was correcting a typo, as she slid a cream-colored folder across the polished boardroom table toward me. 8 trustees sat frozen in their leather chairs, the air suddenly too heavy to breathe. Her hand didn't shake when she spoke. Mine did. I grabbed the edge of the table, the cold wood digging into my palms, just to stay upright. Before we go any deeper, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe, your support keeps these daily revenge stories coming. This journey? It's not for the faint of heart. Follow me. The Brooks Family Trust boardroom had always terrified me, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, oil portraits of ancestors staring down like silent judges. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my place under those painted eyes. Now they felt like they were agreeing with her. Like they'd always known something I didn't. No one looked at me. A cousin stared straight ahead. An uncle shifted, cleared his throat, then stayed silent. The folder lay between us, thin and harmless looking, but I knew, somehow, that whatever was inside it was meant to erase me. My mother tapped it once with a perfectly manicured nail. The trustees deserve clarity, she said evenly. Before we finalize succession planning, everyone needs to understand the truth about Natalie's position in this family. I was 28 years old, sitting in a room built on my last name, and in that moment, I felt 5 again. Small. Unwanted. Standing outside my mother's closed bedroom door, hoping she'd finally let me in. I left the building in a daze, my heels clicking against marble floors that suddenly felt foreign. The security guard nodded at me like always, but I wondered if he'd been told too. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. Text messages from cousins I barely spoke to. Are you okay? Just heard the news. Let me know if you need anything. Empty words from people who'd watched my mother humiliate me and said nothing. I sat in my car in the underground parking garage, staring at my steering wheel. The family empire my grandfather had built, Brooks Industries, worth over $1 billion, had always felt just out of reach. Now I knew why. My mother's words echoed in my head. Not really family. But she'd raised me. She'd been there for birthdays, graduations, holidays. Distant, yes, but present. Or had she just been performing? My phone buzzed again. 3 missed calls from Jennifer. 1 from Uncle Thomas. Nothing from my mother. That silence cut deeper than anything she'd said in that boardroom. I started my car and drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel. My name is Natalie Brooks, and until that morning, I'd believed my place in this family was fragile but real. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn my mother's approval, trying to prove I belonged. I worked harder than my cousins, studied longer, volunteered for every family obligation nobody else wanted. I thought if I just tried hard enough, she'd finally see me as worthy. Walking to my apartment that afternoon, I realized something that made my stomach drop. My place in the family had never been fragile. It had been fake. My mother had known something since I was 8 years old, something she'd hidden while watching me desperately try to earn a love she'd decided I didn't deserve. The photos on my apartment wall suddenly looked different. My high school graduation, my mother standing beside me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My college acceptance, her hand barely touching my shoulder. Every family gathering where I'd felt like a guest in rooms full of relatives. I'd thought I was imagining it, being too sensitive. I wasn't. She'd been treating me like an outsider because she'd decided that's what I was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, replaying every cold interaction, every dismissive comment, every time my mother had chosen Jennifer or my other cousins over me. Then I remembered something small. When I was 12, I'd been playing hide and seek with Jennifer at my parents' house. I'd hidden in my mother's walk-in closet, behind her winter coats. I'd spotted a locked drawer in her jewelry cabinet, the only locked drawer in a house where nothing was ever locked. When she found me there, her face had gone white. "Don't ever go in my closet again," she'd said, her voice sharp in a way that scared me. I never did. But lying in bed that night, 15 years later, I finally understood why she'd reacted that way. That drawer held something she couldn't risk me finding. Something about me. About my place in the family. About whatever truth she'd spent my whole life hiding. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My parents were leaving for their annual trip to their beach house tomorrow. They'd be gone for 5 days. I returned to my childhood home on Thursday afternoon, using the key I'd never given back. The house smelled the same, my mother's expensive perfume mixed with the lemon polish the cleaning service used. I stood in the foyer, looking at the family photos lining the walls. My school pictures were there, but smaller than Jennifer's, placed in less prominent positions. I'd never noticed before. Or I had noticed and told myself I was being paranoid. The lies lived in every corner of this house. I climbed the stairs to my parents' bedroom, my hand trailing along the banister I'd slid down as a kid. My mother's bedroom was exactly as I remembered, cream carpet, perfectly made bed, everything in its place. Her walk-in closet felt bigger than my entire apartment. I found the jewelry cabinet easily. The locked drawer was still locked. I stood there for a long moment, knowing that once I opened it, I couldn't unknow whatever I found. But I was already past the point of no return. I'd been past it the moment my mother slid that folder across the boardroom table. I found a small key in my mother's desk drawer after 20 minutes of searching. My hand shook as I slid it into the lock. The drawer opened easily, like it had been waiting for me all these years. Inside were folders, old and yellowed with age. I pulled out the first one and saw my name. Natalie Catherine Brooks. Beneath it was a lab logo I didn't recognize and a date, March 15, 20 years ago. I would have been 8 years old. I opened the folder and found medical paperwork. DNA testing results. My eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of medical terminology and percentage matches. But the summary at the bottom was clear enough. Maternity test, 99.9% match. The subject is confirmed to be the biological daughter of Rebecca Brooks. Paternity test, subject is confirmed to be the biological granddaughter of William Brooks, founder of Brooks Industries. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I read it again. Then again. I wasn't adopted. I wasn't some outsider my mother had grudgingly raised. I was her biological daughter. I was the founder's only biological grandchild. I sat down hard on my mother's closet floor, the papers scattered around me. If this was true, why had she told the trustees I wasn't family? I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. Then I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it, locked the drawer, and put the key back in the desk. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. The test clearly stated I was biologically connected to the founder. My grandfather. Which meant I wasn't just family. According to the trust documents I'd read years ago, being the founder's biological descendant carried significant weight in succession planning. But my mother had hidden this test for 20 years while grooming Jennifer, my cousin, to be the heir. Jennifer, who was actually less biologically connected to the founder than I was. When I got home, I spread the photos across my dining table and read through them again slowly. Every page confirmed it. I was my mother's biological daughter and my grandfather's biological granddaughter. The only direct biological heir. That night, I ordered my own DNA test online, one of those consumer kits everyone was using now. I needed modern confirmation that what I'd found was real. I needed to be absolutely certain before I did anything else. The kit arrived 2 days later. I sent my sample that same afternoon. I didn't confront my mother. Every instinct screamed at me to call her, to demand answers, to throw those test results in her face. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of her calm voice in that boardroom, the way she'd publicly humiliated me without a flicker of emotion. She'd been planning this for years. I needed to be just as careful. The wait for my new test results felt endless. I went to work at the charity foundation I managed, smiled through donor meetings, and pretended everything was normal. But at night, I researched trust law and inheritance rights. I read through old family documents my grandfather had written. I learned that Brooks Industries had been set up with specific provisions about biological heirs. My grandfather had been old-fashioned about bloodlines. When my results came back 2 weeks later, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the testing center and opened the envelope. The match was identical to the test from 20 years ago. I was my mother's biological daughter. I was my grandfather's biological granddaughter. There was no doubt. I sat there for a long time, the paper in my hands, feeling something hard and cold settle in my chest. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the person who fell apart. Not anymore. That Saturday, I attended a family dinner at my parents' house. My mother had organized it, as she always did, a monthly gathering of the Brooks family to maintain appearances of unity. I watched her that evening with new eyes. She greeted everyone warmly, played the perfect hostess, and when Jennifer arrived, my mother's whole face lit up. "There's my brilliant girl," she said, hugging Jennifer tight. "I was just telling the Caldwells about your promotion." Jennifer worked at Brooks Industries in a senior position she'd been fast-tracked into. I worked at a foundation the family had donated to, a respectable but less prestigious role. I'd always assumed my mother had different expectations for Jennifer because she was more ambitious. Now I understood it differently. My mother was grooming her. Building her reputation. Positioning her as the heir. At dinner, my mother praised Jennifer's work on a new factory project, asked about her ideas for expansion, and listened attentively to every word. When I mentioned a successful fundraiser we'd held, she nodded politely and changed the subject. The message was clear. She'd made her choice long ago. Everything since had just been performance. I stayed late that evening, helping my mother clean up in the kitchen while everyone else gathered in the living room. She was on her phone, her voice low. I dried dishes quietly, pretending not to listen. "The succession plan is almost finalized," she said to whoever was on the other end. "The trustees are on board. Most of them, anyway." A pause. "Then, if she ever finds out what I've done, everything collapses." But she won't. She doesn't ask questions. My hands froze on the dish I was drying. My mother's back was to me, her shoulders tense. 20 years I've managed this," she continued. "I'm not letting it fall apart now. Jennifer is ready. She's been ready." She ended the call and turned around. I was already back to drying dishes, my face carefully blank. "You can go home, Natalie," she said. "I'll finish up." I nodded and left, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel and let myself feel the rage I'd been swallowing all evening. She'd been hiding this for 20 years. Managing it. Making sure I never asked the right questions. But she was too late. I already knew. I started pulling public records on Monday morning. Trust amendments. Board meeting minutes. Corporate filings. Everything was available if you knew where to look and had the patience to sort through hundreds of pages. I found what I was looking for by Thursday. 20 years ago, right after that DNA test was dated, my grandfather's trust had been amended. The changes were subtle, written in legal language most people would skip over. But they shifted inheritance priorities away from direct biological descendants and toward board-appointed successors. The amendments had been filed 3 months after my DNA test. My mother's signature was on every page, along with several trustees who were still serving today. I made copies of everything. Then I kept digging. More amendments followed over the years, each one quietly moving power away from bloodline claims and toward appointed leadership. My mother had spent 2 decades systematically restructuring the family empire to ensure Jennifer could inherit everything, despite not being the biological heir. It was brilliant, really. Slow enough that nobody questioned it. Legal enough that it seemed proper. But it was built on a lie. The lie that I wasn't really family. I met with an estate attorney the following week. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd been recommended by a friend who'd gone through a complicated inheritance dispute. His office was small and cluttered, the opposite of the sleek corporate lawyers my family used. He read through the documents I'd brought, the DNA tests, the trust amendments, the corporate filings, without expression. When he finished, he looked up at me. "This explains a lot," he said simply. "About what?" I asked. "About why someone would spend 20 years restructuring a family trust this thoroughly. Your mother knew you were the biological heir. She knew what that meant under your grandfather's original documents." He flipped back to one of the early trust pages. "Your grandfather was very clear. Direct biological descendants have priority in leadership succession. But these amendments effectively erase that priority. Is that legal?" "Legal? Yes. Ethical?" He shrugged. "That's different. The question is whether you want to challenge it." I thought about my mother's voice in that boardroom. Not really family. I thought about 20 years of being treated like an outsider. "Yes," I said. "I want to challenge it." He nodded. "Then we have a lot of work to do." "But Miss Brooks, this will destroy your relationship with your family." "It's already destroyed," I replied. We didn't rush. That was Robert's advice, and I followed it. We spent 2 months building an airtight case. Every document was reviewed. Every timeline was mapped. Every trust amendment was analyzed for consistency with my grandfather's original intentions. I learned patience I never knew I had. Some days I wanted to storm into my mother's office and throw the evidence in her face. Instead, I went to work, attended family dinners, and smiled politely when my mother praised Jennifer's latest achievement. I was learning to wear the same mask my mother had worn for 20 years. At night, I met with Robert. We discovered more than I'd expected. Shell companies that had been created to move family assets beyond the trust's reach. Board appointments that violated my grandfather's original governance structure. Financial decisions that benefited certain family members while sidelining others. My mother had built a house of cards. It was impressive in its complexity, but it was still fragile. One strong push in the right place, and the whole thing would tumble. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Robert asked me one evening. "Once we file, there's no going back." I thought about the little girl who'd hidden in her mother's closet, hoping to be found. I wasn't that little girl anymore. "I'm sure," I said. That December, my mother hosted the annual Brooks Family Charity Gala. It was the social event of the season, attended by major donors, politicians, and business leaders. I wore a black dress and a smile I'd practiced in the mirror. During cocktail hour, I stood near the bar and watched my mother work the room. She was in her element, charming donors and telling carefully crafted stories about the Brooks family legacy. I was standing close enough to overhear when she spoke to the Richardsons, a wealthy couple who'd donated generously for years. "Of course, Natalie has always been special to us," my mother said, touching Mrs. Richardson's arm. "We adopted her after some complications, and she's been such a blessing to our family." The room tilted slightly. Adopted. She was telling people I was adopted. Building a narrative that explained why I wasn't the heir, why Jennifer was being positioned for leadership instead. Mrs. Richardson glanced at me sympathetically. "How wonderful that you gave her such opportunities." I smiled and raised my glass slightly in my mother's direction. She met my eyes for a brief moment, then continued her conversation. She was burying herself, one lie at a time. I was just collecting evidence. In January, I received an unexpected email. The sender was Thomas Morrison, an accountant who'd worked with Brooks Industries for 15 years. I didn't know him personally, but his name was on several of the financial documents I'd been reviewing. "Miss Brooks," the email began. "I've been made aware of certain discrepancies in trust management that I believe you should know about. If you're willing to meet, I have information that might be relevant to your situation. I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. I stared at the email for a long time before responding. This could be a trap, someone my mother had sent to see what I knew. But something about the careful phrasing suggested otherwise. We met at a coffee shop far from downtown. Thomas was in his 50s, nervous, stirring his coffee without drinking it. I should have come forward years ago, he said. But I have a family. A mortgage. I couldn't risk my job. What do you know? I asked. He pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of financial transfers, emails between my mother and certain trustees, and documentation of how family assets had been quietly redirected. Your mother has been systematically preparing for Jennifer's inheritance, he said. But some of the methods used, they weren't proper. Signatures were forged on some documents. Some board votes were misrepresented in the minutes. My hands shook as I reviewed the papers. This was bigger than I'd thought. This wasn't just hiding a DNA test. This was fraud. Over the next month, Thomas provided more documentation. Email threads that showed trustees being pressured to support certain amendments. Financial records that revealed how assets were being moved to benefit Jennifer while minimizing my potential claims. Board meeting minutes that had been altered after the fact to change voting outcomes. Robert reviewed everything carefully. This is substantial, he said. Your mother didn't just hide your biological status. She actively manipulated the trust structure through questionable means. The Brooks family empire was built on my grandfather's reputation for integrity. He'd been known as a fair businessman, someone whose word meant something. My mother had spent 20 years undermining that legacy while claiming to protect it. I thought about all the times she'd lectured me about family responsibility, about honoring my grandfather's memory. She'd been manipulating me with the very values she was betraying. The empire she's built looks solid, I said to Robert. But it's not. Is it? No, he agreed. It's brittle. And when people realize how it was constructed, the whole thing will crack. I looked at the evidence spread across his desk. My mother had been so careful. But she'd also been arrogant, assuming nobody would ever check her work. That was her mistake. In March, I received a formal invitation to a board meeting. As a courtesy, the letter said, "Given your family connections." It was scheduled for the last Friday of the month. Jennifer would be presenting her 5-year vision for Brooks Industries. I knew what this meeting really was. It was the final step in my mother's plan. The board would formally endorse Jennifer as the designated successor. My mother would get everything she'd worked for. I called Robert. "I'm ready," I said. "Are you sure?" "Once you do this, there's no going back." I've never been more sure of anything. We prepared carefully. Robert would attend as my legal representative. We'd present the evidence methodically, the hidden DNA test first, then the trust amendments, then the financial irregularities. We had copies for every board member, organized and indexed. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully. A navy suit, professional but not apologetic. I pulled my hair back and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like my mother. Strong. Composed. Ready for battle. At the Brooks Industries building, I walked through the lobby with my head high. The security guard greeted me by name. I wondered if he'd heard the rumors yet, the whispers about family tensions and succession disputes. The boardroom was on the 15th floor. My mother was already there, along with all 8 trustees. Jennifer sat at the head of the table, her presentation ready. They looked up when I walked in. My mother's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition. She knew this version of me was different. "Thank you for inviting me," I said calmly, taking a seat across from my mother. Robert sat beside me, placing his briefcase on the table. "Before Jennifer's presentation, my attorney and I have some information the board needs to review." The head trustee, Mr. Patterson, frowned. This isn't the time for, it's exactly the time, I interrupted gently. You're about to make decisions based on incomplete information. I'm simply ensuring you have all the facts. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out folders, one for each board member. These contain documentation regarding Miss Brooks' biological status and the subsequent trust amendments made 20 years ago. I watched the color drain from my mother's face as the folders were distributed. She reached for hers, her hand finally shaking the way mine had in this same room months ago. As you'll see, I continued, my voice steady, I am the biological daughter of Rebecca Brooks and the biological granddaughter of William Brooks, the company founder. There's a DNA test from 20 years ago that confirms this. And here's a current test that matches it. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning. Mr. Patterson read carefully, then looked up at my mother. Rebecca, is this true? My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her perfect composure was finally breaking. It's true, I said. She's known since I was 8 years old. And she spent 20 years restructuring the trust to ensure I'd never inherit what was rightfully mine. My mother found her voice. This is being taken out of context. She looked around the table desperately. I was protecting the family. Protecting the company. From what? Mr. Patterson asked. From me? I said quietly. From your own daughter having what she was entitled to? You don't understand the pressure, my mother continued, her voice rising. My father's wishes, the expectations, the responsibility. You were just a child. I had to make decisions. You decided I wasn't worthy, I said. And then you spent 2 decades making sure nobody could question that decision. Jennifer was staring at the documents, her face pale. She looked up at me, then at my mother. Did you know about this? She asked my mother. About the DNA test? My mother didn't answer. Robert cleared his throat. If you continue reading, you'll find documentation of trust amendments that occurred shortly after the original DNA test. These amendments systematically shifted inheritance priorities away from biological descendants. He paused. You'll also find evidence of forged signatures and misrepresented board votes. The trustees were reading faster now, flipping through pages, comparing documents. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just hidden information. This was fraud. My mother stood abruptly. I did everything for this family. Everything to protect what my father built. You did everything for yourself, I replied. And you used me as an excuse. The next 48 hours were chaos. The board called emergency sessions. I wasn't invited to most of them, but Robert kept me updated. 3 trustees resigned immediately, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Others demanded full audits of family finances. The ones who'd signed those early amendments 20 years ago were especially panicked, realizing their signatures were now evidence of potential fraud. Major donors to the family foundation started making quiet inquiries. Word was spreading through the business community that something was wrong at Brooks Industries. My mother had spent decades building her reputation as a capable steward of the family legacy. That reputation was crumbling in real time. Jennifer called me on Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer. I didn't know, she said immediately. About the DNA test, about any of it. Aunt Rebecca told me you weren't interested in the business, that you preferred your charity work. Did you ever wonder why? I asked. Why I was kept at a distance from everything. She was quiet for a moment. I should have, she finally said. I should have asked more questions. But it benefited me not to, and I'm sorry for that. I appreciated the honesty, even if it came too late. The heir my mother had chosen was falling apart too, realizing she'd been a pawn in someone else's game. My mother cornered me on Monday afternoon, outside Robert's office. I'd just finished reviewing some new documents when I found her waiting by my car. We need to talk, she said. Her voice wasn't commanding anymore. It was desperate. Privately. We sat in my car, the engine off, the silence heavy between us. You're destroying everything, she said finally. Everything I've built. Everything you stole, I corrected. From your own daughter. You don't understand what it was like, she said, her voice cracking. My father's expectations, the pressure to prove myself worthy of the Brooks name. When you were born, when those tests came back, I saw everything I'd worked for slipping away. So you hid the truth. I protected my position. I protected my future. Can you blame me for that? I looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was afraid. Afraid of losing power, losing status, losing control. You were my mother, I said quietly. You were supposed to protect me, not use me as a threat to eliminate. She looked away. I did what I thought was necessary. And now you're facing the consequences, I said. That's all this is. I got out of the car and walked away, leaving her sitting there alone. I could have destroyed everything. The evidence Robert and I had collected was enough to tear the Brooks family empire apart completely. Criminal charges could have been filed. The company's reputation could have been shattered. But sitting in Robert's office that week, reviewing our options, I realized something. I didn't want to burn it all down. I wanted what was fair. What was mine by right. What my grandfather had intended when he created the trust. I want a settlement, I told Robert. Fair distribution of assets based on what I should have inherited as the biological heir. Public acknowledgement of what happened. And a clean break from the family. That's generous, Robert said, considering what they did. It's not generous, I replied. It's strategic. If this goes to court, it'll take years and hurt everyone, including me. This way, I get what I deserve and move on with my life. We presented the terms to the board. My mother could retain her position, but the trust would be restructured to give me my proper inheritance. Jennifer would receive fair compensation but not the empire. A public statement would acknowledge governance failures without detailing the fraud. The alternative was a lawsuit that would expose everything. The board accepted within a week. They had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming, and the risk of public exposure was too great. The press release went out on a Friday afternoon. Brooks Industries announces governance restructuring following internal review. The board has identified several administrative irregularities in trust management over the past 20 years. Corrective measures have been implemented. Natalie Brooks, biological heir to founder William Brooks, will receive her proper inheritance allocation. The family thanks stakeholders for their patience during this transition. It was carefully worded, revealing just enough to explain the changes without providing details that would trigger deeper investigations. The stock price dipped 7% on the news. Industry analysts published speculative pieces about family tensions and leadership questions. Donors to the family foundation called asking for clarification. The Brooks family empire didn't collapse entirely. But it fractured exactly where it was weakest, at the foundation of lies my mother had built it on. My mother released her own statement, claiming she'd always acted in the family's best interests and looked forward to working with the restructured board. Nobody believed her. I didn't respond to any press inquiries. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. 20 years of deception, finally exposed. A daughter who'd been erased, finally acknowledged. An empire built on fraud, finally accountable. By summer, the legal paperwork was finalized. I signed my name on documents that transferred significant assets into my control, real estate, investment accounts, a seat on the board I immediately resigned from. I took my grandfather's name and his legacy. I left everything else behind. The family foundation offered me a new position with expanded authority. I declined. Several business schools invited me to speak about corporate governance. I accepted too, on my own terms. My mother and I haven't spoken since that day in the parking lot. We attend the same charity events occasionally, circling each other like distant planets. She rebuilt her reputation as much as she could, claiming she'd been misled by advisors. Some people believed her. Most didn't. Jennifer took a position at a different company, somewhere she could build her own career without living in anyone's shadow. She sent me a card when she got engaged. I sent flowers. The relationship we might have had was another casualty of my mother's choices. I moved out of the city to a house with a view of the mountains. I had enough money now to do whatever I wanted. I didn't need the Brooks name or the Brooks empire anymore. I had something better. I had my dignity. And I had the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every time my mother sat in that boardroom, she remembered the daughter she'd underestimated. The one who'd been watching. Learning. Waiting. Months later, I woke up in my new house to sunlight streaming through windows that faced east. I made coffee and sat on my porch, looking at mountains that had existed long before the Brooks family empire and would exist long after. I was building something now. Something honest. A consulting practice helping families navigate succession planning without destroying each other. My first client was a woman whose mother-in-law was trying to erase her from a family business. I helped her document everything, just like I'd documented everything. The work felt meaningful in a way my foundation job never had. People called asking for interviews about what had happened at Brooks Industries. I always declined. Some stories didn't need to be told repeatedly. They just needed to be survived. Sometimes I thought about my mother. I wondered if she ever regretted her choices, if she ever lay awake thinking about the daughter she'd raised as an enemy. Then I remembered her face in that parking lot. She wasn't sorry. She was just caught. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her love. I'd learned to give myself what she never could, recognition that I was worthy exactly as I was. Somewhere, in the city I'd left behind, my mother was still explaining herself to people who no longer believed her. Still trying to rebuild an empire that would never fully recover. Still living with the consequences of lies that had finally caught up to her. And I was here, in the mountains, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise. Free. Finally, completely free. This story teaches us never to underestimate someone just because they're quiet. They might be watching, learning, and building a case against you. The truth you hide today will always find a way to surface, and when it does, the lies you built your life on will crumble beneath you. Have you ever watched someone's true character get exposed by greed for money? Share your story in the comment below.